In other news, the head of the US National Rifle Association has resigned just days before the start of a corruption trial. Wayne LaPierre blamed health worries for his decision to stand down after more than 3 decades. The NRA and LaPierre face trial in New York next week on corruption charges. LaPierre is accused of taking millions of dollars from the gun rights organisation for perks, including safari trips and private jet flights. I'd like to welcome Drew Stevenson. He's a professor at the South Texas College of Law in Houston, Texas. Welcome to DW. Tell us, how significant is this resignation from Wayne LaPierre?
Well, it has significance both for the organization and for the upcoming trial. One of the most important remedies that the government is seeking in the trial is actually his removal from his position of leadership. And so in a sense, he has preempted that by stepping down. So it could change the dynamic at the trial. In terms of the organization, he has certainly remade it in his image in the last few decades. And there's a lot of soul searching going on right now. New alternative groups have sprung up. They've lost a lot of members. And I expect that there's going to be a power struggle in the coming weeks to see who really takes the helm. There has been a temporary director, interim director to step in to take his place. But I think that given the history of the organization, there's probably some factions that are vying right now for control of the future of the organization.
Very interesting. Could you just walk us through the case against Wayne LaPierre, who, as you say, is a hugely influential policy figure in terms of guns? As a legal professional, what do you make of the case?
Well, I think the case is solid. In the United States, for tax-exempt organizations or NGOs, and that's what the NRA claims to be, there are restrictions on how much the leaders can use the contributions that the members make, or the money, basically to enrich themselves. It's not like a regular corporation. And so Wayne LaPierre and other leaders have a history of lavish spending on trips and clothes and parties and other types of things like that are very questionable and would be questionable with a for-profit corporation. But what happens is the government can actually step in when it's an NGO or a nonprofit and ask a court to do something, to either they originally asked them to dissolve the corporation, the entity. Doesn't look like that's going to happen, but they can ask them to remove the leaders, to fine the leaders, and so forth. This is often being done by the state attorney general in the state where it's incorporated. Sometimes the federal government, the Tax Revenue Service, will get involved in a matter like this too, but they haven't right now.
I would like to look a little bit more broadly now. The US, as we know, has a complex relationship with guns. That's something that's often difficult for people elsewhere, like here in Europe, to fully grasp. Could you just explain the influence of the NRA and its impact on US policy and politics?
So the gun problem is part of American culture. It always has been. The country was sort of founded through conquest and of native tribes and lands and so forth, and guns were a huge part of that. So guns have always been part of the culture, and unlike a lot of countries, we have a big political gap between rural and urban voters. But in terms of the NRA, starting in the 70s, they became much more politically active. They teamed up with a very aggressive marketing company called Ackerman McQueen and sort of reshaped American politics. And so they had the ability to, if a politician voted for something they didn't like, they could really impose a political cost, and a lot of times a person would lose a re-election bid the next time. And so they were widely feared in Washington, D.C. They had an amazing ability in their heyday, let's say in the 1990s, to mobilize millions of their members to call their congressmen and senators and representatives and so forth to ask them to vote against or for a bill according to what the NRA wanted. The NRA has had kind of an open door at the White House for a lot of the Republican presidents and so forth. So they've really had a lot of influence. And at this point, the parties, it used to be bipartisan, but in the last 7 or 8 years, the Republican Party is heavily affiliated with and dependent on the NRA, and the Democrats are not. And so it's become very much a partisan issue.
Drew, it seems that whenever there's a mass shooting in the US, we hear very quickly calls for thoughts and prayers and very little in the way of substantive change. Given this, entrenched gun culture that you've just described, can it be any different ever?
Well, I don't think that there's one easy solution to the problem, but there are lots of measures that we can take, that we have taken, that have made some difference. And other things that we could do, for example, requiring background checks for private gun sales, extreme risk protection orders, things like that can really make a difference. We have some big gun rights cases pending before our Supreme Court right now. And I expect that this term we're going to get some clarification. There was a decision in 2022 that really created a lot of confusion in our legal system about the meaning of the Second Amendment, our constitutional rights, and so forth. And we're going to get some clarification this term, and then that will give a kind of a roadmap to states about what types of regulations they can enact. There's a lot of different ways to approach it. You can approach who's allowed to sell the guns or buy the guns, where guns are allowed to be carried and used, and so forth. And so, or what types of people are disqualified from owning guns permanently. And so we're going to get some clarification from the Supreme Court about that. And in the wake of that, I expect a flurry of new legislation.
Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us and explaining everything so clearly. That's Professor Drew Stevenson from the South Texas College of Law. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.